Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mighty Oaks Show. Glad to have you with us again this week. Thank you for watching and or listening, as the case may be. Always good to have you with us. If you are watching on YouTube and you have not yet subscribed, please take some time to subscribe. I know I say it every week, but that's because there are people out there, and you know who you are, that don't subscribe, even though I say it every week. So subscribe, hit the notification bell, and that lets you know when more content comes online. If you are listening to the podcast or you're listening over at Mojo or somewhere else, thank you for listening. But take some time to go over to YouTube, and you can check out the content there. Again, subscribe, like, and share, comment, whatever you need to do there. But that's kind of the hub for all of it, and I would appreciate you going there. One of the things you'll find there is a testimonial video of our guest today. And I'm excited to have my friend Reed Hastey with us all the way from Oklahoma. But since we're doing everything virtual nowadays, it doesn't matter. You can be anywhere on the planet. And this is how we do it. But Reed, really appreciate you, man. We've been working hard to get this one to work. But here we are. So thanks for jumping on with us.
Jeremy, it's always good to be with you.
Reed has an amazing story. Again, if you're not on YouTube, go over there and check it out. You can find Reed's story on there. But it's a multi-layered story, and we could talk about many different aspects of it. But when I think about you, Reed, and I think about your story, I was just talking about this a few weeks ago on another show. But your story to me really illustrates how God takes the various pieces of our lives and brings them all together into what He really wanted us to be. And again, I think about my life and the disjointed pieces, and sometimes wondering like, where is all this going? But God brings it together. And your life is very much that way, to the point that you live now in space where you have the opportunity to influence so many folks for good, and communicate the goodness of God to so many different people. But your story didn't start there, and I want to talk about what you're doing now. But let's go back to as far back as you want to, and maybe tell the story of how you ended up coming into contact with Mighty Oaks. So let's set that as the first boundary. So where you grew up, and kind of some of the things you dealt with as you grew up. You were in the Army, and some of the various life events that you experienced there.
Sure. Yeah. I'd love to talk about that. And leading up to that, if I can go a little bit back, into childhood.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about this before, but I'm a farm boy from Oklahoma, and man, a lot of my days, we lived in very rural Oklahoma. My family still have a farm here, and my siblings were much older than me, so I spent a lot of the time, playing by myself. And I would have a BB gun, and I would travel up creeks. And I just remember as a child, I always wanted to see what was around the next turn in the creek. So I would wander far from home, which wasn't easy, which wasn't hard to do, because, when you grow up on a farm, you step out of the back door and your backyard goes as far as the eyes could see. And I just tell that part of the story because I had this sense of adventure set into me. And, but I wasn't, I say that like led me to a recruiter, but there's a little bit more to that story. My entire life, as far back as I can remember, I actually want to be a doctor. And when I was 17 years old, between my junior and senior year, I'd actually enrolled in pre-med at Louisiana Tech. And I went to Louisiana Tech, and I did one semester there. It was a summer semester in between those school years, and did some pre-med, some prerequisites, no big deal. But I mean, it was set. That's what I was going to do. I even got some small scholarships to get into a pre-med and to get into med school. But when I came home that summer, there was an incident, and I actually was in the wrong place at the wrong time as a 17-year-old. And my best friend and I were actually attacked. And a guy, he was actually a local drug dealer. I was just in a bad neighborhood. He mistaken me for somebody else, and he laid a bat across my head, and my right ear actually exploded, and emergency room, everything sewed back together. So I had this head injury. But at the same time, like I say, anybody that's heard my testimony, I was diagnosed as bipolar. But that senior year coming back, I started my senior year with a head wrap, and I believe like I kind of reached the apex of being bipolar, and maybe that injury. But just suddenly, like in a manic state, I decided I wanted to be in the Army. So
Wow.
it wasn't like other guys that just planned it their whole life. It was just a sudden behavioral change.
Yeah.
And, I include that as part of my testimony now, because I've worked through some of that. And that's how, that's really how I got into the military, and everything just sort of shifted. But deployment, and then I'll fast forward really to what you originally said. How did I get linked up with Mighty Oaks? Correct?
Yeah. What were the events that led up to you, coming to a program and getting involved with what we do?
Well, I was in. So I must have been. I was in my late 20s at the time, and I was leaving the VA, and I took a direction. Instead of taking the long or the fast way home, I decided to take the long way, and I took some streets I don't normally take. And I passed by this Mustang that was parked out in the streets, and they had it wrapped in skulls, and it said Triton Fight Center. So something just pulled me off of my course, and I just circled around this car I was just curious, and I saw the plates, and it had USMC plates, and something drew me inside that building. Yeah. I was not looking for a jiu-jitsu academy. I didn't know anything about jiu-jitsu at all, but something pulled me into that academy, and I went in, and I met a man named Pete Wilhelm, which
Yeah.
And his reception was pretty much, here's what it is. I can tell you're a veteran. I do offer a discount. You can train here or you can go away. And that was pretty much the reception. And I thought, I knew in that instant, I'm in the right place.
Right.
This is the guy I've been looking for. And that's the attitude that I wanted.
Yeah.
And, jumped in with Pete Wilhelm here in Triton Fight Center. And as you know, here in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, the relationship with Triton Fight Center, the Assembly Church, and Mighty Oaks. Pete is a big part of the launch of Mighty Oaks in this area.
Yeah.
And of course, so Chad Robichaud comes in, and he does a seminar, and that's how I met him. I was a white or a blue belt at the time. And he invited myself and our late friend, Kevin the Reaper Phelps.
Yeah.
And of course, Kevin cleared the way, and he went first. And after a few years, really, of me keeping Chad at arm's distance, I would see him at tournaments. He would come back to Broken Arrow. I'd pass. I would see him at different jiu-jitsu events, and I'd always say the same thing, man. And you've heard it 1,000 times, right? Oh man, yeah, I'll check it out. I don't think that's really for me. I got it all figured out. All those things, and eventually, man, thank God I made it. I'm glad I made it. Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple parts of this. And the reason I ask you these questions is because there are a lot of people that say exactly what you said. I'll check it out, or that's not for me, or I appreciate what you're doing, but that's for someone else. Let's keep a seat for someone else. And you've heard all these things as well. What was life like growing up for you? Apart from living on a farm, what was your family like? Did you have, mom and dad were close, or, were not there, close to your family, struggled? What was that like for you growing up?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that by. I'll answer that question and then expand on that, because my childhood was wonderful. Like I said, growing up on that farm, there was a lot of responsibilities growing up with a farm, spending summers in the hayfield,
right?
Coming home after school, eating a snack, and then going out and working in the snow, until we ran out of light. I had a very long leash. I had a lot of responsibilities for basically for a kid. And I'm very thankful for all of that. My parents, my dad's a Vietnam veteran. My mom is a retired public school teacher. And they are still married today and retired in Eufaula, Oklahoma. So great family, great older siblings. Like I said, I may have mentioned this. My siblings are both older than me. So it was almost like I had an extra set of parents to lean on and take care of me.
Right.
My older brother, Rex, was also in the Army. and he influenced me to take the engineer route because he's a retired U.S. Army engineer. Yeah. So and that's so many of our guys have childhood trauma. The closest thing that I can relate to is the incident and the brain injury that happened when I was 17, and that's not the same as what a lot of these guys go through.
Right.
And then they end up in the military, right? Because they want to escape that, whether it's child abuse or sexual abuse or childhood poverty, and then they end up downrange in an MOS that may be selected because you feel the need to prove that you're a man, right? So now you're already susceptible to post-traumatic stress, and then you end up in a hot spot. So it could be a recipe for disaster. And I'm not an expert on the situation. I'm just sharing with very vague information of what I've learned. This is anecdotal and through my experiences of working with guys. But it always really, it really pulls in my heart. So what some of these guys have gone through, and I'm thankful. We've got other team leaders that have experienced those things, and if I can't mentor that guy or can't minister to him because I haven't been through that, we have guys that I can connect them with.
Yeah.
And that's really part of the methodology.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. It seems like we compare as human beings our brokenness to other people's brokenness, and if we're not as broken as someone else, we disqualify what we're going through and what we've struggled with. And certainly in an organization like the Mighty Oaks Foundation, where we work with veterans and service members and first responders who have endured, many of them, extreme trauma in their lives, apart from their service, but in their lives. And we hear those stories, and then it's easy for us to say, well, I did have good parents and I had a good home situation, so this is not for me. But the point is, brokenness comes at all stages of life, and you just never know what's going to push you to the place where you're broken. I was talking to Matt Statler. We interviewed him on the show a few weeks ago, and Matt. And Matt was raised as a missionary's kid in a pastor's home, and he and I have very similar backgrounds that way. But it wasn't until he got into the military and got away from all of that some things really started to fall out for him. And that's the story of a lot of people. And I think in your life, that's kind of your story as well, is it was after leaving home that a lot of the difficulties started for you. Can you talk about some of that? I just think it's important for people to connect to that.
Sure. So talk about, childhood great, coming from a childhood that
just some of the challenges you had, coming out of the military. I think, because I know your story. I think Pete Wilhelm and Triton and jiu-jitsu, not in a trite way, in a real way, saved your life, at least for a period of time. But that's because something happened from the moment you left your house until you showed up at the gym and Pete really started investing in you. Can you talk about some of those things, some of the, whatever you're comfortable sharing, but some of the difficulties or the challenges of that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I can tie a little bit of the brotherhood class that we teach at Mighty Oaks, and it just recently sort of a revelation. We talk about C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis, we have a quote, and I'm not going to be able to give the quote, but he talks about his group of friends, the Inklings.
Yeah.
And when I was introduced to C.S. Lewis, that author, even though he, as far as I know, he wasn't a veteran, and my life doesn't parallel at all with this guy who's like an apologist and a Oxford educated man, right? Like I have nothing in common with this, but when he talks about the Inklings, his friends, and how much that friendship meant to him, like it takes me back to being in Fallujah, sitting in the desert with an empty ammo can full of rubbing alcohol we got from medics, set on fire so we could stay warm like a campfire, right? And the gallows humor and talking about the day's events and decompressing all of that and talking about what we were going to do when we got home. And I've realized that when all these men split and went different directions, it created a vacuum. And that vacuum was really the theater in which the enemy was working in my life. Yeah. He was filling that void of that brotherhood that I was missing. loss of purpose, really, loss of identity. You know, in 2004, I think, Jeremy, you were on the 2003 invasion. That's correct, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so when I rotated in 2004, February 2004, and returned back home in 2005, there was still not a lot of soldiers and Marines coming back in. So you were somewhat of an anomaly, or you know, I hate to say a rock star, but especially here in Oklahoma, you were really put up on a pedestal. And I just remember that feeling of, you know, people coming up and shaking my hand and stuff, and it made me very uncomfortable. But for a short time, like, I had this identity, and I finished my contract, but like so many people we talked to, so many veterans that we talked to, the exit out of the military was not glamorous. And there's some sting that can come with that. And there's some identity loss that can come with that. Well, if you come out of the military and then you have the rug pulled out from under you, right? And that identity is missing, you reach out and you grab the first thing, and it's, I'm a broken veteran for a lot of us.
Right.
And I reached out and I grabbed onto that as tight as I could. And, you know, unfortunately, I decided that was going to be who I was. I was going to be that broken veteran.
Can you expound on that a little bit for people that may not be familiar with that? I mean, we talk about that to veterans a lot, but there are people that may not be veterans that don't connect to that. What does that mean to grab on to being a broken veteran?
Okay, so you know, that with the lack of purpose, and that causes like a vacuum, right? So to latch onto that, I'm a broken veteran, part of the appeal is you are somehow still remaining attached to the military and the government. If I'm communicating that clearly, you're still in and out of the VA hospital. People recognize that you're no longer serving, but they recognized that you did serve. And, you know, you don the I'm a disgruntled veteran hat and all the t-shirts and all the stuff that says, you know, and, you know, the tattoos up and down your arm that says, you know, stay away from me or whatever. Right. You know, grow the beard out, all the stuff that we do to keep people at arm's distance, but still you're replacing that uniform with that new physical identity, even, really.
And it's crazy because that, and I've said this, and I've even said this recently, that the real problem with veterans, the problems that we struggle to solve are not suicide and broken relationships. It's a lack of purpose and a lack of identity. If we can deal with those things, the other things begin to work themselves out. But it's crazy to watch people take off the identity of the military uniform, whatever branch of service that is, and put on the identity of the broken veteran, because it's such an empty place. There's no hope there. There's no purpose there. There's no direction there. There's no end. You have to do that literally as a 20-something-year-old guy for the rest of your life, or you're walking away from your identity, which really gets in the way of people finding healing.
Yeah, and you said the key word there. There's no hope in that. And, you know, what's the number one thing that we're trying to fight, you know, is veteran suicide. Yeah. And I don't think you can get to a place of being suicidal if there's hope. Like those two things don't exist together. It's when all hope is lost. It's when all hope is lost is when somebody becomes suicidal. And I have a friend that I grew up with. He's not a veteran. His name's Andy, and we were very close friends. And interesting, like, we were both, as teenagers, and we were a mess. Both of us were, and we both went our own different ways. And just recently, so, you know, 18 years later, or however long it's been, 20 years later, actually, he found me. He Googled me and found me through Mighty Oaks, and located me. And we're both in ministry. And that's a long story, but That's almost unbelievable that the two of us ended up in some type of ministry. But Andy volunteers as a suicide. He works a suicide hotline.
Wow.
And I was rapping with him. Like what's the what's the first thing you do? If somebody's suicidal, and the method is, and I've used this before. Where are your kids? Because your children are hope, right? So that's very common. If somebody's at that state, is hey man, where are your kids at right now? To get them off of,
right,
to switch the gears back to not on me, but where are my kids at?
Right.
So sorry man, that was sort of a long
no, that's good,
long rant about hope. Really about hope.
What where did identifying with the brokenness of being a veteran, where did that take you, or what path did that take you down in your life?
Yeah, not very far. I linked up with Pete, and I even donned the identifiers on my jiu-jitsu gi, of my rank and my unit and all that jazz. And fortunately, I found my way to Pete, and then from Pete to Chad, and then through Mighty Oaks, found my way to Christ.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, it led me to divorce and losing custody of my daughter and self-medicating and attempting to go to school, but failing to be able to hold employment, failure to build relationships. So that's really where it led me.
And what it causes in all of that, and tell me if I'm wrong, is if you've identified as a broken veteran and then you experience that list of things that you just mentioned, it gives you an automatic out all of the time, because the reason I'm having this problem is because I'm a broken veteran. The reason this is happening is because I'm a broken veteran. It's never my fault. It's always because I'm a broken veteran. That's
exactly right. And one way to think of it is, if a veteran comes into our outpost, or we find them at the program, or anybody, sometimes they get this idea that they're broken, as in, okay, if my truck is broken, I take it to my good friend Michael, who's a mechanic, right? But usually the guys we work with, they're not broken in the sense that a part needs to be repaired. They're lost. The only thing that's broken is the navigation system.
Yeah.
And that's a series of, it's like, we talk about that book, Principle of the Path, with Andy Stanley.
Yeah.
And sort of what I remember about that book, the main idea was, the path you've gone, it's a system of decisions that you've made.
Yeah.
That has gotten you to this point. A part didn't fail. You don't need the mechanic. Like you need a navigator.
Yeah.
You're lost. You're not broken. You're lost. And we say, you've heard this. We always say this. It's the guy that's, and we can tie this back into what you were saying about the excuse of, I don't want to go to Mighty Oaks because there's guys worse than me, or worse off than me. And the guy that's azimuth, or for our civilian friends listening, that's 1 degree off on their direction.
Yeah.
The guy that's one degree off, and the guy that's completely lost under the canopy, and he needs to shoot a 180 and get that back azimuth and get out of there. You add time and distance, and both guys completely miss their mark.
Yeah, the path you're on is taking you somewhere. And you have to ask the question, is it taking me where I want to go, or where I think I should end up? And that personal responsibility piece is huge. Let's talk about personal responsibility as it applies to kind of replacement conditioning, and you started to dig yourself out of a hole when you started to train jiu-jitsu. And here's my disclaimer: jiu-jitsu is not magical, but it is different. And a lot of people will say, "Well, jiu-jitsu saved my life," and I get what they mean by that. And I think in a lot of places that's absolutely true. But it's not the art, it's really the discipline that goes into that, and the personal responsibility that's required, and the hard work. Can you talk about talk about personal responsibility and replacement conditioning and how, that process that you went through moved you forward. I heard you talking to somebody one time. You're a jiu-jitsu black belt, high-level competitor, and I heard someone ask you one time, how do you get your black belt in 5 years? You get yours in 5 years? There's something like that, right?
That is correct.
Which is crazy. Normally it takes 8 or 10 years. And your answer was train 3 times a day for 5 years and you'll get your black belt, right?
Yeah, just slam. What I say is it took me 10 years to get my black belt. I just slammed that 10 years into 5 years, and I don't recommend it. Yes, and I traveled and competed as a purple belt. Started teaching classes, jumped in and started teaching kids jiu-jitsu, which of the competition, teaching adults, teaching kids probably accelerated my learning curve more than anything. Because if you can teach a 4-year-old the mechanics of breaking somebody's arm without actually breaking it, then you have a clear understanding
right.
of how an armbar works.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, talking about that, and you also mentioned, the jiu-jitsu saved my life, right? Man, I used to say that, and now when I hear that, I get an alarm goes off, because over that 5-year journey, I've had a surgery on both knees. I've torn both meniscus, so I've had 2 jiu-jitsu specific related injuries and spent a lot of time off of the mat because of that. I've got a lower back injury that almost put me out of the game, actually. So if jiu-jitsu saved your life and that's your savior, when you zig when you should have zagged one day at the gym, or somebody, you attempt a fireman's carry and you drop somebody forward over your head instead of to the side, I know because I've done that, and you're off the mat, then what do you have, right? Yeah. So that always concerns me, but I do understand from personal experience that sentiment that people share when they say jiu-jitsu saved my life. That form of what we call replacement conditioning.
It certainly digs a lot of people out of a hole, and not just jiu-jitsu. People find this in a lot of places. It kind of turns the brain from I'm a victim of my service to I really can invest in something and progress, and it should not be your savior, and it should not be the thing that you say saved your life. But that replacement conditioning can definitely be an important step along the path.
Absolutely. And, talking about jiu-jitsu and their replacement conditioning, which we always say, if anybody's listening and they've heard the term replacement therapy, it's really the same thing, but that word therapy is really gross, and we don't like it. So, we say replacement conditioning, but some of the things of going through it, and also working with police officers and veterans, and the guy on the street that's been through things, a couple of things unique. Well, it's not unique to jiu-jitsu, but a couple of things that make it a good form of replacement conditioning that you can look in other areas. Jiu-jitsu, it releases endorphins. That's very important. And if you're physically limited and you can't do something like that, there's other things that release endorphins. Cooking, learning to play a musical instrument, those type of things. If you have physical limitations, if you can hear me and you have physical limitations, there's other ways to do that. And those things, also other things in jiu-jitsu. One of the biggest things for me is going in and there was a ranking structure, the way that you fall in by belt order. There's an order. Oh, I can make sense of this in my brain. This is something I'm familiar with. I start here on the back row, and you put in your time and service and you move to the front row. Okay, that makes sense. And also one of the biggest things is the second day you step on the mat, a lot more. Your learning curve is way more than the guy that showed up that day for the first time, right? Immediately you can turn around and start helping someone else, and you can immediately almost start mentoring somebody else and working with other people. So that pulls the focus off of you, and it turns it towards helping someone else, which is it is a key component of overcoming this thing we call post-traumatic stress. Get the focus off of me and get it on somebody else.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've talked to hundreds of people, and I'm sure you have as well. that ended up in the right place, but for many of them it began with something like that. Not necessarily jiu-jitsu, but for a lot of people it can be, any number of things, but getting around other people, doing something that's hard, realizing that progress can be made, and it almost allows them to clear their brain enough to say, maybe there is hope. Maybe there is something bigger out there. And I think through that process, that's when you finally came to the place where you were willing to come to a program and say, all right, let me try this thing out. I've said this many times. You've heard me say it many times. I remember when you were at the program, and I remember your testimony during the program. So for those that aren't familiar, we have our program and people come and we do things all week. At the end of the week, everyone has the opportunity to give what we call a testimony, to tell their story. And most of the time it's like, this is where I showed up. This is what I learned. I'm so excited to go home. I can't wait. It's going to be amazing. And I will never forget your testimony, because it was, this is where I was when I came, this is what I've learned. I have no idea what's going to happen now. Thanks. And then you walked off.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, all right, well, we'll see. And the next time I saw you, you were coming back through leadership training and you had already started investing in other men. Can you talk about kind of what happened in your brain during that week where you said, okay, I need to invest in other people in a real way?
Yes, I will try. And all of that, when I look back at that time, I almost don't know how I don't know how I got here. I mean, I know you and I know, but that's something that I would say is how did I get to this point, and how did I get from A to B? It's almost like I was being carried, without any will of my own. But part of the reason that testimony, I think, was probably so void of hope was, when I came through the program, Jeremy, I was an agnostic, and to go through the program as, I wouldn't take the leap and say that I was an atheist. So I always say that I was an agnostic. But coming out of that program and the amount of information and the change in heart that I had while I was there, and I remember, my dog tag said Christian on it, so they would know how to bury me, right? And
yeah,
I think we've talked about this before, but not figuratively, but literally. Like, I had a Bible that I never really opened, but I put it in my foot locker when I was downrange. It's like, these two things, me doing this job here and this book, there's no way that those things can operate in the same place at the same time. And it was like the record skipped, and I never got back there on my own. So there was years of this void between me and God. And that was probably part of that testimony, how we got from going through the first time and then back to leadership training. I think it could have only happened this way. I re-engaged immediately. I came back at that time. I think we may have been doing a session every 8 weeks or something like that at Kairos.
Yeah.
And I think I was on the next flight as soon as I possibly could. And then the next level of training, and that's how it went. If there was a lag, I may have not had the discipline. Yeah. If too much space and time would have went between there. But also at that same time, we didn't have as many outposts or connections at the time. I think actually there was some space and time before I would actually go into a church. And I always tell this about the assembly and Pastor Ron here in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. But it's crazy. I pulled it up on a map. From my front door to the front door of the church is 3 clicks exactly. So I had to go from Oklahoma, from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma to San Miguel, California, right, and back. So someone at San Miguel could tell me about the assembly, and I could meet a wonderful woman named Heather and listen to her testimony, who's from the assembly, and get plugged into that church. Yeah, that's incredible. Oh man, and that church has been such a blessing, even to Mighty Oaks. Can you talk about the importance of church life in your life and in your family's life, and the work that now that you're spearheading there between the assembly
and really your region, the assembly as well, but your region, Triton Fight Center and Mighty Oaks, and the good things you've been able to see happen there.
Sure. My relationship with the assembly and what they've provided my family, we talk about the 4 B's at Mighty Oaks: being the word, being prayer, being touch with your cornermen, or being fellowship, and also being church. And those 4 things I look at as the perimeter around my life. And if one of those goes down, I got a surface that's now a gap. And that church has been, for me, talking about the personal before we talk about, what they've done for us as far as Mighty Oaks and our outposts, but personally setting that perimeter and protecting me, really.
Yeah.
And also, going back to like jiu-jitsu and church also, like, that's a place you can go, you can connect, you have an opportunity to serve there and take the focus off of yourself, and whether it's security or, we've got you go to the assembly and you're not going to be able to get to your seat without encountering a Mighty Oaks veteran.
Yeah.
It'll either be in the parking lot, they're helping you park your car, or they're the security when you come in, or they're greeting you, or one of our wives are taking care of your kids in the nursery.
Wow.
So we just completely integrated into that church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And then from that came an outpost, and the outpost is an opportunity for people in various communities to connect with graduates and start to get back on the path, or if they're returning from a program, to stay connected. And we have outposts across the country. You can find that on our website. But talk about your outposts a little bit and some of the important relationships and some of the good, I say good things, but some of the good connections that have come from being a part of that outpost.
Yeah, good connection. So when you say good connection, I think of my friend Drew Spivey.
Yeah.
So when we launched the outpost at the assembly, Drew Spivey was the first person to approach me and say, "I'm in. You tell me what I got to do, and I'm in." And Spivey, of course, has been to the program, and he returned once and went through mentor training at Ohio. And last night at an outpost meeting, he's sitting right next to me, pouring into another veteran, and that's been 4 or 5 years now. And that's the kind of connections we made. He's still there with us, and we're continuing to grow. So most recently, talking about the outpost and where that's going. The men in my outpost, like, we all share the same sentiment on some of the stuff that's going on, the current climate right now. And here in our community, we faced some tragedy, and our police officers have faced some tragedy here. And we look at police officers; they're our brothers.
Sure.
And that's the way it is for many obvious reasons. Like, we have a lot in common with those guys and gals. But I will say this about the outpost at the assembly. You know this about me. I'm an introverted person, man. And I stay off the grid and just kind of mind my own business. The outpost at the assembly has grown in spite of me and not because of me. It's because of the men that have come in, on their own.
Yeah.
And it has grown. But back to our police officers, when these incidents happened here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we basically come together and said, we got to do something. What can we do about this? And through events that are way above and beyond us, that we really have no control of, several guys just in a brief moment came in that were connected to another well-known church here in Tulsa called Church on the Move. And these men went to Mighty Oaks. They go to Church on the Move. Some of them linked up with me through Triton. They started coming to the assembly. So what we did is they cleared the way, and we approached Church on the Move, and Church on the Move listened to us. They allowed us to come in and tell them what Mighty Oaks was, to the best that we can explain what happens at a legacy program.
Yep.
And they said, we're in, and we just launched our second outpost.
Awesome.
Here in the Tulsa area. As far as I know we've got 19 outposts now, counting this one, I believe is what I counted on our website. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first outpost that has launched from another outpost laterally, like an auxiliary outpost.
Yep.
So the beautiful thing is we have 2 outposts here on opposite sides of town, and they're on alternate nights. So that just clears the way for so many guys. Man, I'd love to come check you out on, on a Monday night, but I'm patrolling, like I'm working that night.
Yeah.
Well, at least we have another alternative. And also today we established, I've been talking with my good friend Gary Rouse in Oklahoma City, who's a Mighty Oaks alumnus, me. And I've been communicating with Robert, and we are launching the 3rd in the area in a place called Dell City, which is in the Oklahoma City area, October the 6th. So that's only a few hours away from us. So we're very soon going to have 3 outposts in the area.
That's incredible.
So,
and what's amazing about that is it's just, folks who've graduated our program reaching out to other people who maybe have, maybe haven't, but need that brotherhood and that connection that, veterans and service members and first responders, you just get it. You don't have to explain yourself. You get it. And that's so important and so helpful.
Yes. So we're really, our heart is really, of course, always, we're out to find our brothers and our sisters, veterans in active duty, but something's really just pulling us toward the police community, and some of the amazing thing that's happening through that, and also through Triton, because there's a large military and police presence at Triton Fight Center. But I won't give his name because he's still on duty. He works undercover, but he linked up with us all about this same time that we started working on expanding this next outpost. And he came through and he went to Mighty Oaks, and he came back, and we sat right here at this table we're at, and he said something to me. He said, it feels like we can win this.
Yeah.
This officer, he cleared the way, and actually this morning he and we went and spoke to the Fraternal Order of Police for the Tulsa Police Department, their health board, and we were able to present Mighty Oaks to them as, hey, here's what we have to offer you, and by the way, this is no cost to the police department. We're not asking anything from you. We just we're just here. This is how it impacted us. This is what we're doing. This is why veterans are going and reaching out to police officers right now. And this is where our heart is.
That's awesome. Man, that's awesome, Reed. Hey, what do you tell? So in a conversation like that, how do you compel a police officer or a veteran or someone who's serving in the military? How do you compel them to go to a program like Mighty Oak? What does that conversation sound like?
Same conversation that I had with a veteran, really. And there's some barriers that we always clear the way on. One, hey man, there's going to be no cost to you. Like, we're going to get you a flight scholarship. We're going to get you right. We're going to get you there. And the I don't rate type of concern, I share with them like my own anxieties of going. And even though I'm a combat veteran and served in Iraq for 12 months in 04, 05, even I had anxiety about, I'm an engineer, I'm going to go with a bunch of infantrymen, and I'm not going to fit in, basically, right?
And you were in the Army, so.
Yeah. And at that time, it was, I think I was the only one.
There were a lot of Marines around.
Yeah, there sure was. But, yeah, and also one of the things if I invite a police officer to the outpost, is, in our outpost, it's not just for combat veterans. So, hey, man, there's going to be veterans there that also didn't deploy, and we don't care. It's not about that. Like, just come on in and just try it. If what you're doing now, it's not working, come in. Most of the police officers I do encounter are through Triton Fight Center. One of the helpful things about that environment is I believe we now have 5 black belts, and I think 3 of them run their own academies that are in our affiliation.
Wow.
That have been through Mighty Oaks. So there's a lot of leadership there in that organization that guys look up to that have been to the program and will say, you know, you need to go. And it's funny, I'll be talking to a veteran or police officer on the side of the mat, you know, and we'll be hashing out life and just talking about things, maybe sharing some scripture, whatever. And then Pete will walk over and just interrupt and say, you need to go to Mighty Oaks.
Oh, man, that's awesome. Pete, he doesn't waste words. He says exactly what he's thinking.
Economy of words, yeah.
Economy of words.
You don't have to wonder you don't have to guess if Pete likes you or not.
Right. He will let you know. Let's end with this. I like to ask this question when we end. We talked about hope in the beginning, but if someone is in need of hope, someone's trying to figure out where's the hope, what do you tell them? How do you talk about hope, and how do you offer hope to someone that's desperate? And we talk to a lot of desperate people, and there are a lot of desperate people listening. Where do they find hope?
Yeah, man, it's pretty straightforward with me right now. Jesus is still on the throne, and that's the hope. There is a purpose for what you've been through. I will point them to James 1:4. Count it all joy when you fall into various trials, and let the testing of your faith produce patience.
Yeah.
And let it have a perfect work in you.
Yeah.
There's a reason you're going through what you're going through. And then I point them towards 2 Corinthians 1:3, I believe, where the Bible talks about comforting others as God comforted you. So again, taking it off of that focus, but hey man, don't let the tragedies that you've been through go to waste. And there is hope, because I've been there, and I have so many brothers that have been there. There is hope. There is a way out of this. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers by any means, but hey, I've been in this dark spot you're in, and I got the coordinates. I know how to navigate us out of this. Yeah. And we pull that guy out of the darkness and dust him off. And then guess what? You know what we do? We send him back in to get the next guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome, man. Thanks, Reed. I appreciate it. We could talk a lot more, and hopefully we'll talk again, but thanks for sharing. I know it's not easy to tell your story, but so many people need to hear it, and not just veterans. There are a lot of, particularly right now, a lot of people who are very overwhelmed and broken inside and don't know where to go. And man, how important that is. Thanks for sharing. Appreciate it.
Jeremy, thanks for your leadership, and thanks for everything that you've done to impact me and my family and my community here. Thank you, Jeremy. We love you, man.
No, thank you, Reed. Appreciate it. For those of you that are watching, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we look forward to talking to you next time.